Okay, so this is a follow up from the close annotation questions on Act 1, Scene 2. The first of which is on lines 18 to 24 and 30 to 32. So the question is, how do these lines expose Othello's commitment to idealism, and which abstraction is particularly evident in his speech here? On these lines here, 18 to 19. My services which I've done the Signory shall out-tongue his complaints. So we're talking here about his reputation. But the key feature to note in this particular couplet is the idea that his services, his status that is derived from his military commitments and his achievements, are being personified. They are going to out-tongue his complaints. They are going to out-tongue the bad word of Brabantio. So at this moment in time, he's using figurative language to celebrate his virtuous nobility in the service of the Venetian state. And this is developed a little further down. He says, I fetch my life and being from men of royal siege, and my demerits may speak unbonneted to as proud a fortune as this that I have reached. Now, one of the key things to note here is the word demerits, which carries an unusual kind of meaning here because it sounds like the opposite of its meaning. It actually means merits. So it's used surprisingly here. Fetch my life and being from men of royal siege, and my merits may speak unbonneted. And this verb is so typical of Shakespeare, talking about the need to doff one's hat to someone. So there's no need here for his merits to unbonnet themselves because he has earned the right to be proud in himself. The key part here, in terms of Othello's identity, I fetch my life and being from men of royal siege, men of royal rank. His entire identity and his entire well-being and his entire sense of self originates from his achievements and his esteem in terms of the governors of Venice and other people that occupy prominent positions in its social hierarchy. So you can see here this sort of divided being that Othello is. He is intensely invested in the social fabric of Venice and is a key, component of its existence. But at the same time, he is both an intricate part of that social fabric and not at all. But here we can see the way in which he invests his own identity with this abstract concept of nobility and virtue that derives from his military service. So this is particularly evident in this statement here in lines 18 to 24. A little further to that, we go over to lines 30 to 32. Not I must be found, my parts, my title, and my perfect soul shall manifest me rightly. So we're talking here about his own willingness to compromise his identity. In the context of this scene, Iago's encouraged him to go in and broach the topic of his elopement with Desdemona, with the Duke and with Brabantio. But Othello cannot here be seen to be anything other than the perfect abstract embodiment of righteousness. I must be found, my parts, my title, and my perfect soul. We're talking here about his natural gifts, his status in the social hierarchy of Venice, and his perfect soul, his clear, intact, guilt-free soul shall manifest me, shall represent him appropriately. So in all of these cases, his gifts and his rank and his righteous soul form this coherent whole in his rhetoric here. But we know that Othello is a divided being, and that this abstract conception of self that is derived from his gifts and his rank and his guilt-free conscience, this noble, virtuous hero that he deliberately constructs himself as, is only one component of his identity, and that his racial otherness is the second part of this. So the abstraction here that he seems to be most committed to is his own virtue, his own virtuous nobility that he constructs deliberately with language. How might we read the ambiguous lines? This is the next question. The ambiguous lines 25 to 28 is evidence of the way in which Othello has internalized Venice's racist ideology. He says in these lines, "But that I love the gentle Desdemona, I would not my unhoused free condition put into circumscription and confine for the sea's worth." So the basic meaning of these lines, but for the fact that I love gentle Desdemona, I would not limit my unhoused free condition and confine for the sea's worth. So he's aware of the fact that he potentially could be in a condition of bondage or slavery, and that he's aware that he is essentially risking that unhoused free condition of his liberty. As someone who has actually been an emancipated slave, he has experienced liberation. So he is fully aware of the risk of being indentured and in bondage again. And at this point in time, he's almost, despite his sort of intentions, in love with Desdemona, because he knows that this relationship is likely to provoke the social norms and the taboos of social Venice, and that he understands the risk involved in doing so. Next question, lines 40 to 47. How do these lines reveal Othello's centrality to the plans of the Venetian state? As we see a little further down, Cassio says, "The galleys have sent a dozen sequent messengers this very night at one another's heels, and many of the consuls raised and met are at the Duke's already. You have been hotly called for, when, being not at your lodging to be found, the Senate hath sent about 3 several quests to search you out." Now, in terms of the kind of basic comprehension of these lines, we have this dozen sequent messengers this very night at one another's heels, chasing Othello down. These 12 different individuals chasing each other to go and find Othello, because they know that he is the only really fit military commander for the battle that seems to be unfolding, or threatening to unfold, with the Ottoman Empire. Many of the consuls raised and met are at the Duke's already. So we've got the nobility and power, the potentates, the power wielders of Venice, already arranging to meet the Duke. You have been hotly called for. It's the sense of urgency that this word actually connotes at this moment in time. You have been hotly called for. That the Senate have sent about 3 several quests to search you out. There's 3 separate searchers out looking for Othello. And what we see here is that in terms of the actual moment of the plot, we have obviously Othello carrying out his own business in his attempted elopement with Desdemona, at the very same time that the centres of power in Venice are searching him out. So what we see here is this divided being on the level of the narrative, that the city's central power-wielding potentates are looking for him, and that relates to his integral role in the social fabric of Venice, whilst at the very same time he's pursuing the private relationship that is likely to remind him of his outsiderliness, because it's this kind of sexual and racial hostility that is the source of everyone else's envy, basically, in the city. So these lines are particularly revelatory for underlining the divided nature of the status of his identity in the city. The last question on Brabantio's lines, over the page 62 to 82. He says, addressing Othello, "O thou foul thief, where hast thou stowed my daughter? Damned as thou art, thou hast enchanted her, for I'll refer me to all things of sense, if she in chains of magic were not bound, whether a maid so tender, fair, and happy, so opposite to marriage, that she shunned the wealthy curled darlings of our nation, would ever have, to incur a general mock, run from her guardage to the sooty bosom of such a thing as thou, to fear, not to delight. Judge me the world if 'tis not gross in sense that thou hast practised on her with foul charms, abused her delicate youth with drugs or minerals that weakens motion. I'll have it disputed on. 'Tis probable and palpable to thinking, I therefore apprehend and do attach thee for an abuser of the world, a practiser of arts, inhibited and out of warrant. Lay hold upon him. If he do resist, subdue him at his peril. So the question is asking you to identify a semantic field and annotate a brief comment explaining how the linguistic pattern is connected to the racist social norms that govern the Venetian Republic. Now, what you can clearly see from just looking at this section: enchantment, the chains of magic, foul charms, drugs and minerals. Over the page, an abuser of the world, a practicer of arts inhibited. This semantic field that we're talking about here is of magic and of the supernatural. So the connotation of this extended linguistic pattern is that there could be no logical or plausible reason for someone of the status and attractiveness of Desdemona to find an individual like Iago sexually attractive, and that therefore this magic that he claims to, that Othello has used, is the reason for her attraction to him. And you can see this sense of disgust, that it's illogical. If she in chains of magic were not bound, this idea that she's somehow in bondage because of his enchantment of her. She is popular, we can see this, because the wealthy curled darlings of our nation, these kind of fashionably coiffed, their hairdos are fashionable. The wealthy suitors of our nation that have tried to pursue her have incurred a kind of general hostility from her, and she has run from her guardage, which means, parental custody, to the sooty bosom of such a thing as thou, to fear, not to delight. So there's a sense of real palpable disgust in this description of Othello, that he is a sooty bosom, that, he's actually dirty. He's not only, black in colour, but he's actually tainted and dirty and morally corrupt. And this is where we get this black-white image pattern that defines lots of the language in the play. Okay, that's enough for Act 1, Scene 2.